Population and demographics of the Lower American River gold mining region in 1860. Hello, I'm Kevin Knaus. I study early California history, particularly this region now under Folsom Lake, which is the Lower American River gold mining region, the Folsom area, Rattlesnake Bar, that particular area, Salmon Falls. And one of the things I've always been interested in is the population of the area as it relates to the waterworks projects. And the waterworks projects diverted river water from the North and the South Fork to deliver water to the miners after the initial gold rush. So 1847, this area was primarily populated by Native Americans, estimates of between 500 to 1,000. There were some people that were herding cattle in the area from the land grants. And of course, there were people going from Sutter's Fort in Sacramento up to Sutter's Mill in Coloma, and that's where the gold discovered in 1848. And in 1849, the rush was on. There was a significant influx of men from the East Coast that did a lot of mining, primarily focused on the riverbed. So they would dam up the rivers and vacuum up all the gold. And by the early 1850s, most of that easy gold, relatively easy to get, placer gold, was gone. And the miners turned their attention to the hillsides and the low hills along the North and the South Forks of the American River. But they needed water, and that's where the water projects came in. So I was looking at the area where the water projects, the water ditches, delivered water to the miners. That area that I characterize as the Lower American River mining region begins below Auburn on the North Fork of the American River, where the North Fork ditch had their dam at Tamaroo Bar, and then they ran a water ditch all the way down through Placer County into Sacramento County. There was the Clark and Foster's ditch that took water out from the north side of the South Fork of the American River and delivered it to Negro Hill, right out there on what we call today the peninsula. And that was a predecessor of the Negro Hill ditch. And then the Natoma ditch. The Natoma Water and Mining Company had a dam a couple miles above Salmon Falls, and it diverted water and delivered it down to Mormon Island, then to Folsom, Alder Creek area, and Prairie City. And it was those water projects that really kept gold mining alive and pertinent into the late 1860s and beyond. To learn of the population and the demographics, I turned to the 1860 census, which was the best census from the beginning of when California became a state, because it was more directed at particular areas. It's sometimes difficult to get a sense of where the people lived, but at least those census pages were by township. And I reviewed 134 pages of census records and then transcribed that information from those census pages into an Excel spreadsheet to do the sorting and looking at the data. One of the interesting things I looked at was the age distribution, and this is where we can also see some of the errors that are introduced into the census records. But first, looking at the 1860 census pages for that particular Lower American River region, you will see a lot of children between just being born and 6 years old. There was kind of a population explosion in the late 1850s, 1860, as families settled into the area and started having children. Then the age dips, but then you'll notice those spikes, age 30, 35, 40, where there was no way there was double the amount of 30-year-olds as 29 or 28. We have to remember that the individuals living and working in this area English was a second language because many of them were from Europe or China. Many were illiterate, didn't know the year they were born. Maybe they were working off different calendars. So I have a gut feeling that the census recorder just kind of looked at an individual and said, you look 40 years old. And that's where they put it down. But we still can get a sense of it. The population in terms of the working adults was put between the ages of 25 and 36 in the area. One of the things the census enumerates is where the individual was born. And interestingly enough, of a total population of 5,412 people, from those census pages in that area, 10% were born in California, which tells you that there was a lot of families that were going and starting. Of the adults, 33% of the population was born in the U.S. So a combined total of 43% of the individuals in this area were born in the U.S., some of them very young. Now, within that California birth, there were some people that were older that were born in the California region before the area was taken over by the U.S. and California became a state. 2% of the population was from North America. That would be Canada, Mexico, the West Indies. Europe comprised 28% of the population, 1,506 individuals. And China, 27% of the residents in the region were of Chinese descent. So a significant portion, as boats of Chinese immigrants came into San Francisco, and then those men headed up into this region. If we look at European birth, where did those people come from in Europe? Ireland contributed the most with 38% of the Europeans, or 568, and England 17%, or 251. Now, some of those individuals, they didn't, leave their home country in 1849. Some of them had come to the U.S. in prior years, maybe had married and then migrated out to California. Germany contributed 13%, or 192. Within the German population, many of them not only listed Germany, but also places like Bavaria and Baden and Württemberg, because their identity of the birth, that was very important to them. And of course, there wasn't that modern day Germany as we know it today with those particular boundaries. But there were men from all over the European continent, and there were folks from Australia as well. If we look at the contribution of people in the region born in the United States, outside of the 522 that were born in California, New York comprised the largest representation with 417 individuals. Then there was Maine, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Ohio. You can see a lot of northern New England states had come to California and were settling here in the region. And those, when I say northern states, I mention that because the United States was on the verge of a civil war. So there was an influence in the politics because of those many people from the northern countries. If we look at the population in the area by gender, no surprise that adult males over 16 years of age comprise 74% of the population. And of course that was, the arduous trek was primarily, that's what men took, and of course from China. So primarily men in the region. Women over the age of 16 was just 10%. But interesting from a demographic standpoint over time, when we look at the gender below age 15, where many of the people, the young adults and children, were born in California, we see that male and female is 8%. So as the families grew, that disparity between male and female in the natural population decreases. We see just a normal gender balance there. Occupations. What drove the economy in this region? And it was primarily mining. We have 2,655 men of the 5,412 that listed miner as their occupation. That was 49% of the population was engaged in the mining industry here on the Lower American River. There were 4,034 people who actually listed an occupation. And so of all of the people engaged in some sort of labor activity to generate an income, 66% of them were in the mining community. Laborer came in way down second place at 240. And laborers were individuals who may have worked on flumes, building homes, doing different odd jobs in the area. We see that farmer and gardener, there were 229, and that indicates a larger agricultural presence that was beginning as men turned from mining to vines and planting trees. We had some merchants. Blacksmiths, I believe, was a little bit higher than we might normally think about, but Folsom was the terminus of the Sacramento Valley Railroad and the beginning of the California Central Railroad, so there was some railroad depots and maintenance yards there that needed blacksmiths. Other occupations of note, there were 15 ditch agents or ditch tenders, and those were men who worked for the ditches, the water ditches. The water agents sold the water. The ditch tenders, made sure the water was distributed to the consumers and worked on maintenance. So they were very important to keeping the overall mining industry going. Stone cutters, 22 men, and I believe that was probably in the granite works. And then wood choppers, 15. Wood was the primary energy source for the area. There was a little bit of coal and there were some water wheels, but to heat homes, cook, or run the steam engines, it was all about wood. If we look at the miners as a particular group and where they came from, 48% of the men who said that they were miners were Chinese. 1,275 men of Chinese descent that were miners in this area. 29% were European, 780 men. 21% from the United States. That was probably a much higher percentage back in 1849, 1850. And then 2% from North America, Canada, Mexico. This map gives the breakdowns of the residents from the census pages in the different regions. Placer counties, which was amalgamation of Township 1, 3, and 9. I counted 1,127 residents. Salmon Falls Township, which was fairly large, 1,360. Natoma Township, fairly small at 645. Granite Township, which included the town of Folsom, 1,956. And Mississippi Township, 324. Now, the 1860s was a real period of change in the United States and here in California. First, 1861, the Civil War breaks out. So there were some men and families that probably left the area to go to the respective side that they wanted to support. But even bigger than that was the flood of 1861 and 1862, and it was tremendous. The flooding event wiped out the bridges on the north and the south fork of the American River, wiped out the dams, miles of flume, mining operations and their equipment was swept away. Many men died in the floods, and it was a long period of time for the water ditches to recover and the miners to recover and get back to normal. And there were probably many men who just said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I just lost it all. The North Fork ditch was particularly hard hit, and it took them a year to get their operations up and running again. And I don't believe they ever fully recovered financially from that because of the additional cost to rebuild all those flumes and the dam to continue supplying water to the miners. So if we look at the change of population between 1860 and 1870, in the next census, we see that Granite Township lost 19% of the population, Mississippi Township lost almost half, Natoma Township went down by 19%, and Salmon Falls a whopping 68% of the population. Many people left. What is interesting is that some of the townships in the regions actually had an increase in Chinese population. So Granite Township went from 286 Chinese immigrants to 346. And also Natoma went from 55 to 131. So the Chinese were still immigrating into the area in the late 1860s. And many of the Chinese did leave the area to go work on the Central Pacific Railroad, which was underway in the Sierras in the 1860s. Maybe some of them came back, but that was probably the primary source for a big drain of the population in Salmon Falls, because Salmon Falls had a lot of Chinese immigrants working in the mines. So I'll be doing additional research. I've actually done blog posts and videos on some of those particular townships and dive into the population and demographics of Granite and Salmon Falls and Mississippi Township for the people that live there and the different occupations. But it was a dynamic time, and I believe that probably 1860 was maybe the high water mark for residents in this region, that after the initial gold rush, they were here, they were going to be calling this home. So for history above Folsom Lake on the Lower American River mining region, I'm Kevin Canals.